Alright, we need to mount the Speedo drive on the rear wheel instead of the front wheel because the GSXR front end has a much larger axle and it won't fit through there. But the rear wheel does have the same size axle, so we're going to put that back there. Now the problem that we've got is this connector plugs in right up behind the frame headstock, so the wire isn't long enough to reach the swing arm where the rear wheel is situated. But I have a solution. I have another Speedo drive that happens to be broken. The wires are ripped clean out of it. So we're going to be using this wire to cut off the end here, splice it onto that, and make one really long wire that'll plug right directly into the factory harness. And there we have it, one super long Speedo drive cable. Speedo sensor consists of two parts. There's the outside housing, and then there's the inner rotor. And the inner rotor needs to come out of there, and you need to see if you can fit it into the wheel. In my case, it just fits in there, and it's pressed in there, and it's nice and snug. And the outer housing goes over that, and you need to make sure that the rotor spins freely inside of the housing, but it has to be locked up to the wheel. So you have to make sure that you get a nice tight fit. Now all this stuff fits together pretty well, but I noticed there's a little bit of interference here, as it turns out that the outer housing is actually nipping the wheel over here where the disc bolts are at. So what I'll have to do is I'll have to grind just a little bit off of the plastic here. Alright, I'm not happy with the people that go ahead and take the rotor and friction fit it and then just leave it like that and expect it to work. And to me, that's just not the right way to do it, because when I put it in there and I friction fit it, I discovered that the rotor turned itself loose and it freed itself up. So the friction fit wasn't a good idea. These guys are very brittle, and gluing it in just seems like a bad idea, especially if you need to get your tires balanced. And you take this off at a dealership, they're probably going to wind up breaking the thing. So I don't recommend that you glue this in. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of JB Weld, and we're going to pour it in between the pedals on the rotor. And that way it'll emulate the Speedo drive in the front wheel that was previously on the front, how it used to be hooked up. And none of the glue will be attached to the rotor itself, so the rotor will be removable. And it should fit in just like it did on the front. So anyways, first thing you need to do is you need to get this all cleaned out. And I recommend, you know, something like a carb cleaner or a brake parts cleaner, but don't spray it directly into the bearing. If you spray it into the bearing, it's going to get into the seal and it's going to ruin and break down the grease that's in the bearing. So that's probably a very, very bad idea. So what you want to do is get a clean cloth, or clean enough in this case, and you want to spray a little of the carb cleaner on it. And then simply take it and just swab out the area. Get the grease off of it. It doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be clean enough so that way the JB Weld will stick to it. Alright, I think that will accomplish it. The first thing we need to do to make sure that JB Weld does not stick to the rotor is we need to put a little bit of cooking spray on it. Some PAM or some WD-40 even. Just make it damp and then rub it down. Don't put it in here when it's wet, because that will foul up the JB Weld. Here we go. WD-40's got the rotor nice and shiny, but it's not dripping, there's nothing shaking it off. So we can just simply drop it in. Once you get it in there, don't move it, because any of the WD-40 that's on it might foul up the bearing and get oil or WD-40 on it, and that'll cause the JB Weld not to stick. So once you put it in there, leave it in there. Don't move it. There we got our JB Weld here. You want to set it up as a 1-to-1 ratio. To get this mixed up, I'm going to need 2 hands to do this. Once you get it stirred up, we're going to simply squeeze just a little bit into the gaps here around the rotor, in between. And you don't want to cover the pedals on the rotor, because if you cover it, you're going to have difficulty getting the rotor back out. So just get it in between the rotor and the wheel. There it is. We got the rotor nice and set up. We got the epoxy JB Weld in between the rotor pedals, so that way it's going to stick to the wheel. Of course, the rotor pedals and the rotor itself is coated with a light layer of WD-40 to stop it from sticking to it. I put a little bit more in than I wanted to because it overlapped the pedals just a little bit, but we're going to let that set up for a bit. And then before it gets completely hardened, we're going to remove the rotor. Alright, it turns out that the speedo sensor is actually too thick as compared to the spacer that used to be in there. So I couldn't get the rear brake and the rear wheel together because it just wasn't enough space. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to do some cutting. And I can't cut this because it's plastic and it's going to fall apart and it's a sensitive piece of equipment. So what we're going to do is we're going to take off the respective amount of material from the brake bracket, from the inside of it. And make sure you label the inside. And the inside is the part that touches the spacer. So we're going to take some measurements now. And these measurements will probably work for everybody, because what we're going to have here is we've got a spacer that's 26.5 millimeters thick, and then we have the speedo sensor about 31. So doing the math, we got to take about 5 millimeters, roughly 5 millimeters off of the brake bracket. Currently the brake bracket is 20.4 millimeters. So we're going to drop 5 off of that and drop it down to about 15.5. So we're going to start cutting. This is aluminum. It won't be too hard. You can use a grinder, or you can take it to your favorite machinist and have them mill it down flat. That would be the optimal solution, but because it's really not too critical as to how perfect it is, we're going to just go ahead and hit it with my grinder. Alright, and after some grinding, we got it down to 15.5 millimeters, and I think that's exactly what we were looking for. Okay, it's starting to set up. So now we want to just gently lift the rotor out of there. There it is. Now doesn't that look familiar? Now we're going to clean off the rotor from any epoxy that might be stuck to it, and there's very, very little because that WD-40 coating did a hell of a job. So we'll just clean off a little bit that's there. We're going to let this set up, and then we might just file down the edges a little bit just to make sure that the rotor goes in and out of it nice and cleanly. And I'd also like to have it with just a little bit of slack in it, so that way it's floating. After letting the epoxy harden, we went ahead and assembled the wheel. The wheel is in the swing arm, as you've seen me do in the other videos. We got the chain up there, the sprocket carrier, the wheel is in there, the spacer on the left-hand side. We've got the brake bracket that I machined on down, fit into there also. And there's a speedo drive. And everything fits together in here quite nicely. It's a little bit snug, but I think we've got it good, where everything is turning nice. We got the back wheel all put back together, ready to go. We just need to put the pin back in the rear nut. I have the speedometer sender wire looping around the back of the brakes here. That way it can follow the brake line under the bike, up through here, then up behind the swing arm, through my wheel hugger, and then up into the bike, up this way. So this way it's in a path that you know that's not obstructed by anything, and that nothing is going to be rubbing up against it. I figured that was the best way to do it, rather than going forward and hoping that it would float in between here and not get rubbed by anything, or not get caught by perhaps a stick or something that might have shot up through there. So we've got it hooked up that way, and I think that's going to work out well. It offers it some level of protection to stop it from getting nipped. And I think I'm going to put one more zip tie on it right there just to keep it secure. And we're ready to start snaking it up through the frame, around the motor, and up to where the speedo sender is. A speedo sender plug-in is up front. There's the speedo sender plug-in, and here's the wire that I routed on up from the rear speedo sensor. There's only a few inches to spare on here, so double length wire was the right answer. I took those two speedo sensor wires and put them together, so that was definitely the right thing to do. But this should plug in simply right into here. Alright, next thing we need to do is just simply zip tie that all together and bundle it in there so that way it's out of the way. Put our tank back down and we can test it. Alright, we're running. It's a little cold, but we're running. Let's go ahead and put it in gear. Alright, I think second gear will be adequate. Watch the speedo. So yes, It worked. And that's how you relocate your SV650 speedometer to the rear wheel. That's all there was to it.